Manly P. Hall. Like, what was his overall viewpoint on all that?
We had a very interesting conversation once when we were over at his house and they had the TV on. They would kind of go channel to channel, and MTV came on, and they left it on for
Wow.
a moment. And at
That's
that
wild.
time, yeah,
Just
at
in and
that
of
time,
itself, that's wild.
it is.
All right. What's up, motherfuckers? Welcome back to Black Hoodie Alchemy. As always, I am your host, Anthony Tyler. I have another special guest in with me. This is going to be the last special guest that I'll have for a little bit, kind of ending the rounds here. I've talked to a lot of different people. Shout out to past guest Ashley Ryan. This is actually how I found out about Mr. Ronnie Pontiac here, and I'll tell you all about him in just a moment. So real quick, any pleasantries, you could check out the Discord chat. That's been a lot of fun. I've been trying to plug that. Joe Roop, host of Lighting the Void, the main man behind the Fringe FM himself, actually helped me put out a dive manual audio book. So dive manual is my first book. That's out now. You can check that out if you like. The second book, Hunt Manual, that's he's working on that next, so keep that in mind. And I am segueing the Patreon into the main feed. I threw a lot at the wall at the beginning of the year to see what stuck, and I don't like. Um, I just want to keep everything consolidated for now. So yeah, if anyone was interested in that, you've heard that from prior episodes. We're just keeping it all consolidated, but I got into that a little bit last week. We're just going to talk with my guest here. I'm very excited. Um, Ronnie Pontiac, before I toss the ball over to you a little bit, let me tell the people about you. We were talking beforehand. You've got quite the resume. Anybody familiar with your name will likely be familiar with some of the books you've put out. American Metaphysical Religion, which is a very cogent title. It's exactly what it sounds like, and it gets into everything in that whole American spiritual zeitgeist. And it seems a little bit, not at all like completely on the heels, but just kind of reminiscent of the mindset in like Manly P. Hall's Secret Destiny of America. Kind of has that viewpoint, that vantage point to it, in a way. And he also has a book co-written with his wife Tamra Lucid, The Magic of the Orphic Hymns. And Tamra has a book that she put out. I have the title somewhere here, but it is all about her time, yeah, making the ordinary extraordinary, my 7 years in occult Los Angeles with Manly Palmer Hall. So if you haven't caught on yet, there is a link between the mighty Manly P. Hall himself and Ronnie Pontiac here. For the last 7 years of for Manly P. Hall's life, Ronnie and Tamra were very connected with Manly P. Hall. He not only took Ronnie under his wing a little bit, Ronnie became his substitute lecturer, his research assistant, and Ronnie's got his own story that I can relate to in a lot of ways with punk rock roots in LA and a little bit of a transformation, an alchemical transformation that led to a lot more work with punk rock and alchemy. So we could get in, there's a whole lot we could get into, but first off, how you doing today, Ronnie? Thanks for joining me.
I'm good. I hope you're having a nice Easter.
Yeah, we are recording this on Easter. I hope you are as well. So it's good vibes for sure. Now, let's see. I don't want to put you on the spot at all. Like super friendly question here. And I feel like I kind of know the answer, but uh, with your relationship to Manly Hall, do you ever get tired of like answering questions about it?
I don't. He was such an amazing human being, and I feel so, even to this day, stunned that I had a friendship with him.
Yeah.
His kindness and his generosity and the experiences I was able to have thanks to him make it a delight to talk about him.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. That's what I would imagine. There's like man, well, let me get into this a little bit to wrap up some of that introduction. I just want to say some of the relatability here. Um, I grew up in Anchorage, Alaska, and I, at a certain point, like big into horror movies, punk rock, heavy metal. Um, and I felt myself just, as one can imagine, disenfranchised and angry and not sure where to vent my frustrations really. And I dabbled in garage bands and things. And at a certain point, making the long story short, I came across people like specifically Manly Hall and Carl Jung. And after doing some research, not only into their work, but into their character as people, I felt like not only did they have so much to say in their research, and not that their work was end all be all, but it was such fertile food for thought, and it was, it felt like something worth completely absorbing. So in a way, I very consciously kind of took Jung and Hall as spiritual mentors, in that sense of just, these guys aren't the, some sort of, be careful. There's that phrase, kill all idols, like, have respect and reverence. But, and I guess that's what it was. I had a lot of respect for their mentality and their work. And I I fully embedded myself in it, and it's just wild. And so again, that whole punk rock kind of vibe feeding into that, and it's just wild that that literally happened to you. And you talk about how you started in it was kind of like a biker offshoot, like punk rock band that was kind of starting to take off. What was that like? And meeting Manly Hall, like, do you want to get into that a little bit? Because I'm sure people are interested.
Okay. I started out as a kid that had no social contract. My parents were immigrants who were fleeing from a war, and my whole family were war survivors. They were pretty messed up. I was overprotected and neglected at the same time, which made me kind of a freak at school. I was a runt, so I got my ass kicked constantly. And by the time I hit like 17, I had become a criminal, and I was a nihilist, and I was searching for some kind of a of an ideology that could empower me. So I went to Crowley, I went to Anton LaVey, I went to Austin Spare, I went to Evola, and I found them all to be romantic idealists who I held in contempt because they weren't dark enough. I wanted absolute hatred of humanity. I felt like human beings should be eliminated because we were like a mistake of nature. By the time I was 17, I had sort of channeled this into a band, and I had gathered around me people who were equally without social contract, who felt no loyalty to anything or anyone. And I was shocked to find that there were a lot of people who responded to that, who there were bikers and punks and metalheads and all kinds of people. And there was also, I have to admit, unfortunately, a racist subtext to where I was coming from. And it was an amazing experience in a way because there was a tremendous amount of power that suddenly came to me. I was transformed from someone who had no power and who was constantly being shown that I had no power in violent ways to somebody who was wielding power and violence. And I was violent myself. I pulled knives on people. I attacked people with my car. And I had people around me, like the bikers providing security for the band, who would do violent things thinking that I would want them to without even asking me.
Wow.
it was a very intoxicating place to be for somebody like who I was at that time. And it's a miracle to me, and I'm very grateful that no one really got badly injured,
Yeah.
including myself, around all of this because there was so much violence around this band. But, you know, we played clubs because they sold so much liquor when we played, and there was always a sold out audience with lines wrapped around the block. And the aggression that the band was putting out there was returned by the audience, and those were also very intense scenes of support from the audience that were almost like religious experiences where bottles of liquor were passed from the stage to the audience and created these big reactions from people. And so I was really in a bad place, headed to a worse fate. Like Tamra says in her book, that I was looking for a second Altamont. And I guess I was, in a way, although I just thought I was gaining power and I was busting bullshit all around me and just trying to be like the nihilistic truth. So, what saved me, two things saved me from whatever fate that would have led me to. The first was that I met Tamara. I was at a notorious club. She was somebody that had just had no business being there. She was from a different area and didn't really know anything about this scene, which was filled with criminality. And she approached me at the close of the club and was really frightened and said, I'm been singled out by this group of guys who are going to attack me, and I don't know what to do. I can't get out of here. I don't have any transportation. I'm terrified. Will you help me? I found out later that the guy that ran the club had warned her to stay away from me when he saw her look at me. He said that I was really bad news, but she felt something about me that made her think that I was the right one to ask. Besides the fact that I'm sure I was menacing. I was dressed all in black, smoking a black cigarette and staring at everybody with hatred in my eyes. She said I looked like an anime villain, and so she said, please, can you help me? And something woke up in me, and nobody had ever asked me like for help like that. She was this kind of shining presence in the club, and I could see the people that were after her. So I said, yeah, I'll protect you, and I did. And we wound up falling in love very quickly from there. And pretty soon she was living with me, and it love changed a lot. Plus, she was a cynical like me, but she was a very honest person and a very ethical person within her cynicism. And she started to teach me how to live better, how to not be such a complete monster. And so in the midst of that, I guess really about a year or so into our relationship, and we were like barely 20, something like that. She and I was given some money by my parents to get a haircut. And I took it instead to this famous bookstore that no longer exists called the Bodhi Tree, which was like the archetype of all metaphysical bookstores. And I found a copy of Manly P. Hall's Encyclopedic Outline. It was the sixth edition, which is still a pretty big old tome. The pictures are black and white, but it looked to me like a book from the 19th century. And when I opened it, there was this picture of Manly Hall looking like an actor from the 1920s or something. And I just thought, oh, he must be dead, but wow, what an amazing book. I got to get this. So I brought it home after I had to pay it off over a few weeks, and it just completely changed my view of the world. It opened me up to the idea that there had been all these people that were outside official history who had these incredible daring explorations of consciousness and of soul and of what life means, and of the direction humanity will take, and of how to create a universal reformation. And I was so thrilled by this, and also by the viewpoint underlying all of it, which I think was encapsulated in the dedication, which was to the rational soul of nature. and it seemed to be to me that this book was opening the door to a higher level of understanding of life. And so I brought it up to a friend of mine who was a very interesting woman who'd been a Carney dancer, and she was preparing to move to Virginia Beach because she was freaked out by Edgar Casey's prophecies that California was going to go into the ocean any minute, and she had scared me into thinking about moving to Virginia Beach because she was so absolutely certain that California was doomed within a year. And when I mentioned the book, she said, "Well, honey, he lives just down the street, basically. You can go hear him lecture at his society on any Sunday at 11 a.m. for $1." So,
Wow.
the funny thing, man, was I didn't go. Like for months, I didn't go. And like every Sunday, Tamara would say, "We going?" And I'd be like, "No, no, that's okay, not yet." And it was because I was afraid that he was going to look right through me, that everybody there was going to look right through me. The things that I had done that had blackened my soul would be vividly clear to these people, and I wouldn't be welcome. I was ashamed, really. And so eventually she said to me, he's really old and he could go. And then how would you feel that you never went and even heard him talk?
Yeah, right at the threshold, and it just
Yeah,
never took it.
so
Yeah.
we went one Sunday. She drove me down there on a beautiful sunny afternoon, well, actually late morning. And so the interesting thing was that when we attended this first lecture, and she describes it all very beautifully and hilariously in her book, he looked straight at me and he said, people who have fear of natural disasters such as earthquakes because they carry guilt about how they've been living their lives.
Wow.
And he also looked straight at her, and as she had been walking up to the lecture, she had seen a flower that had broken through, a weed that had bloomed and had broken through cracked concrete. And she had reflected on how something so delicate and beautiful could find its way through such a forbidding circumstance. And he looked right at her and he mentioned flowers that grow through cracks in the concrete. So, needless to say, we were rather impressed. And
Yeah.
I found out later when I worked for him that he often did that. I heard many people, I heard their stories about him doing exactly the same thing, looking straight at them. And the most interesting thing, perhaps, about it is working with him, I found out that he couldn't really see us. His vision was very poor by then.
Hmm.
And so he saw blurs in the audience for the most part. And yet, uncannily was able to deliver these direct messages to people. There were many discussions at the Philosophical Research Society, which he founded, about what is going on there. Is he channeling? Is he an initiated master who telepathically knows? There were many theories. My personal favorite was that at that time in his life he was deeply into Buddhism and Taoism, and I've never seen anybody, just the vibe around him was so peaceful and tranquil. And there were always synchronicities flurrying around him. And I think of it as just being in the Tao, being
Yeah.
so in the Tao that when you're speaking to people, synchronicities occur naturally and constantly. But who knows what the description, the real meaning behind that was. How he had that skill is a mystery.
Yeah.
So we decided we wanted to volunteer to do anything just to be around the place, to support what they were doing and to support him and to soak up some of it. I was amazed just by the conversations going on after the lecture and how all these words I'd never heard before, and the people were so kind and so intelligent, and there's an elevation to the place that I'd never experienced anywhere. It was, dare I say it, civilized. In a way, I had dismissed civilization, but here I found a kind of civilization that was very nurturing and inspiring. So when we showed up the next day, on Monday, at the gift shop, and we said we'd like to volunteer, they looked at us skeptically, and but they led us upstairs to be interviewed by someone who had a managerial position there. And she really was interested in Tamra because Tamra had skills. She had office skills, and she had held jobs with messengers and services and with banks and things like that. When even as a teenager, and I had nothing, like I fronted a biker band. I mean, they kept looking at me like she and the boss who came in and looked us over for a moment. They definitely agreed that Tamara had something going on, but for me, no idea what I could be doing. But they did ask an important question, it turned out, which was, do either of you have familiarity with foreign languages? So I said, yeah. I said, actually, I grew up around German and French and Polish and Russian, and I've been hearing them all my life. And oh, really? Okay. Do you read them? Not really. Can you speak them? No, not really. Okay. Next day, phone call from PRS. They want to hire Tamara. Well, I was a dick, and I said no. I'm not staying home and taking care of the cats while you go work at PRS. That if they don't want me, then forget it.
Oh.
And and she was like, okay, I don't care. I'd rather stay home with you and the cats, and so then they called me the day after that, and it was real funny because Tamara picks up the phone and she's like, oh, hi, and she's like, oh, it's PRS. And I'm like, oh yeah, they really want her, And she's like, oh no, it's for you. For
Hmm.
me? Okay. I pick it up and they say, Manly Hall wants to meet you. Be in his office tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.
God,
Okay.
so surreal. Wow.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, what in the world is going on? But it's a thrill. And so we come down there the next morning and they lead me through the door, this special, awesome door that he would come out to lecture. And into his office, which was this very large, very beautiful, spacious room filled with Asian art. I mean, just beautiful and with a vibe in it that I have never felt anywhere else again in my life. Like just this tranquil, beautiful vibe. Big Japanese altar and beckoning cats and Buddhist sculptures and yab yum statuettes from Tibet and a special selection of books on a low bookcase behind the desk. And the desk itself is this gorgeous carved Chinese wooden desk with dragons and just beautiful.
Damn.
It's very dark wood. And he's sitting behind it. And then behind him are four women, two on each side, with their arms crossed, who are giving me the skunk eye. And they're all elderly women. They really run the place. It's the vice president of the society. It's the person who's the personal secretary to Manly Hall. It's the woman who runs the library, and so when I walk in, he says to me in this combination of W.C. Fields and Barrymore, "Come on in and make yourself miserable," or actually, it's "sit down and make yourself miserable," which I found out later was a common greeting that he gave to people. And so I sat down. He had a pile of paper in front of him, and he shoved it in front of me. And he said, "This is a galley. Do you know what that is?" And I said, "No, sir, I have no idea." And he said, "Well, take a look at it." He said, "This is the galley of my alchemical bibliography. This is my collection of rare manuscripts and books on alchemy and Rosicrucianism. This will be published as a limited edition." And I said, "Oh, wow, it looks beautiful. How amazing." And he said, "Well, I would like you to edit it." And I said,
Uh-oh.
"Wow, you've certainly mistaken me for someone else because I don't have any education. I mean, I just found out about alchemy through your big book like recently, and I don't even. This is way past my skill set. I barely got out of high school." And he said, "No, you're going to be fine. You'll see." Well, I took the galley, and I just kind of thought, well, if he thinks, I mean, I guess, but I just felt like this is a mistake. Something's gone wrong here. But okay, so I picked it up, and I walked out through the library exit, and as I did so, the vice president of the society, who'd formerly been in the military, she came screaming around the corner and grab, I mean, not actually screaming, but like moving very quickly around the corner. And she grabbed it away from me. And she said, I'm sorry, there's been some kind of mistake. And I actually thanked her because I was just, this is not something that I can do. And we went home and I felt incredible because I met him. And the fact that he'd offered this to me was really cool. And I had to just kind of digest that experience.
Yeah.
But when we got home late that afternoon, there was another call from PRS, and this time it was his personal secretary, Edith. And she said, he wants to see you tomorrow morning in his office. So I went back the next morning, walked in, and this time he was alone in there. And he had the galley in front of him again. I sat down again, and he pushed it in front of me again. And he said, young man, I want you to edit this galley for me. And he said, in the future, you will take orders only from me. And he said, if anyone contradicts what I tell you, you come and tell me. And he said, now I'm going to help you do this. He said, we'll meet in the morning and I'll give you your day's work. We can have lunch in the vault where all the books and manuscripts are. And you
Damn.
can ask me questions about any of them. And then in the afternoon, I'll quickly look over your work and see how you're doing. And he said, you'll see in no time you'll be in the groove of it, or however he put it. And so I agreed to do so. And the first job he gave me was, and the reason I had a job was because the actual bibliographer, who was an academic who did a wonderful job pulling it all together, he had included in the notes a lot of information about the use of various bodily fluids in alchemy. And Manly Hall did not want to include that information. He felt it was too dangerous.
Hmm.
And he also felt that his following would probably be more repulsed by it than inspired by it. And he wanted to make this an inspiring publication. And the academic, feeling that this was important information about alchemy that was historically relevant, refused to remove it. So he was softly fired, and I was brought in. Job number one, remove the bodily fluids from the alchemical bibliography. And then I had the incredible privilege of being able to have lunch with him in the vault and pick up any book and ask him about it. And man, I saw things, incredible. The Backstrom manuscripts, which were the diary of a ship's captain who was an initiated Rosicrucian, some from Freemasonic Rosicrucian order, and who had also copied over important classics of alchemy and then added his own notes to them, including drawings and just amazing stuff. And I remember one time he said, "Hey, pick up the other end of this scroll and let me unroll it." And it was a Ripley scroll. George Ripley created these gorgeous alchemical scrolls. There's only, I don't even know, like 5 of them in the world or something. And
Wow.
this was a particularly splendid one. He unrolled it and let me look at it. And he had the triangular Saint Germain Holy Trino Sophia, and I was able to look at that and talk to him about it and hear stories about how he got this stuff, which was also amazing, because he remembered everywhere that he got things and how he got them. And so that was a tremendous education. And he was so pleased with my work and how rapidly I was evolving that he wanted me to become his personal research assistant. Now, that was a tremendous privilege, and I got to have experiences like how this man who was in his 80s at this point was able to tell me in a library of something like 50,000 volumes or something. I mean, this huge library. He would say, I need such and such a book, and you'll find it on the second row upstairs in the northeast corner on the 3rd shelf with a red binding, right? That kind
Wow.
of, I mean, just incredible. And of course, when he lectured, he was constantly dropping names and dates and just,
Hmm.
amazing. Really showed me that somebody who stays devoted to work that they love, that they can perhaps prevent the loss of memory and mental sharpness that so many people think they are doomed to experience. And I certainly had absorbed from my family the sense that aging was nothing but debilitating. And here was this man who was coming to work every day, and he was simultaneously, like, he would, like, in the morning he's working on his book, and in the early afternoon he's working on an article for his journal, and then later he's working on what he's going to be lecturing on for the next quarter. And of course he
Wow.
has to take care of the business of everything, and preside over events, funerals, and go to the hospital for someone who in his flock who got sick, and marrying people, and just an amazing a life that this man was leading. And I got to observe it up close. And then at a certain point, the person who was booking lectures at PRS, who was the librarian, decided that I should give lectures. And I'd never done that, and I felt very intimidated. And he said, "Yeah, you should." And he gave me the advice to not use notes, to only lecture about things that I know enough about to be able to speak about them. And then they booked me on a Sunday, which, normally they started out lecturers on weeknights in a small room above the library that had this portrait of Madame Blavatsky hanging there. And the big room was reserved for Sundays, and it was almost always him, although we had a couple of other lecturers who would come in when he was too sick, or was busy doing something elsewhere. And they booked me for the Sunday 11 a.m. for my very first lecture. And it sold out, and I did really well, and he was very proud of me. And I became popular enough as a lecturer that he picked me as the first choice to replace him when he couldn't make it.
Wow.
So sometimes I had to lecture on subjects of his choosing, which was very interesting. Like he had one called Marriage in the New World Order. I mean, that is not something that I would choose to lecture on.
Yeah.
That is so fraught with problems, just both marriage and New World Order.
No kidding.
And but I talked to him about it, and he gave me this great perspective about marriage being symbolic of the union of soul and body, and that the New World Order was all about the universal reformation. It was about it had more to do with in a way, it was almost like the Star Trek Federation kind of a vision of the future,
Yeah.
where humanity was just so much more evolved that there could be cooperation on a worldwide level. It had nothing to do with dictatorship or autocracy or anything like that. It was the Rosicrucian vision of everybody experiencing a reformation of religion and science, and therefore of society itself, so that it becomes a much more just and logical experience than it has been throughout human history. So Tamara and I became friends with the Halls, with Manly and Marie, and they were so kind. They used to take us out to lunch and dinner all the time, and they told us we could visit anytime. We didn't even have to call up. We could just drop by the house. And
Wow.
so we often would come over to the house and hang out with them. And it was amazing, man. I mean, especially for somebody, I only had one grandparent survive. And she was a really, really messed up person physically and mentally. So I never had grandfathers and such, or, a loving grandmother. And they were like grandparents to Tamara and I. They would take us out on museum outings, and we would get to walk around with them and listen to them, these two amazing walking encyclopedias, talk about the art that they were seeing. And we'd go book hunting with them.
Wow.
And yeah, they were really wonderful, wonderful friends. But after 7 years, during which time I should mention, we became Manly Hall screeners. First me, and then Tamara. And Tamara became the one that he really depended on more than me. He really felt that she got to what was going on with people. And so our job was to answer the letters and the phone calls that came in asking for audiences with him. that was an eye-opening, that was really something. I mean, seeing all the damage that can be caused by virtually any path of spirituality, but especially we saw damage done by ceremonial magic and by spiritualism. Um, but I think it had less to do with the paths, which all paths, including regular traditional religions, have that danger. They can make people who have issues suffer an amplification of their problems. And so our job was to talk to those people and to see if they were people that he should meet with, that we thought that he could help, or that they were legitimate. And some of them were really not. I mean, a lot of people tried to get to him for their own very strange, some of them very strange purposes.
Oh, I can only
And
imagine.
yeah, so we saw a lot of that. And then I even had to, at times, like, he had me substitute for him at funerals at times.
Wow. Man, yet is absolutely captivating. And there is there's a lot of questions that I'd like to ask. As a
Okay.
small aside, because this is something that we could spend time on, and I just kind of want your general opinion. When you were talking about the library and everything, not only are you sitting around with Manly Hall's expertise, but you're in the library. So you're very familiar with these eclectic and old texts. Like, what do you think about the Voynich manuscript? Do you think that that's a fake? You're familiar with that, right?
I am, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and for listeners, that is a very strange alchemical tomb that people still have not been able to decipher from the medieval era. I don't remember the exact date though. What's the deal with that? Do you have an idea?
Well, yeah, it's a good example of something that also applies to the Orphic hymns and all the Orpheus stuff, which
Mm,
is, for example, we don't know whether there was an Orpheus. Some people argue there was. Most argue there wasn't. We don't even know if there was truly an Orphic religion. It all may have been a literary hoax by the Pythagoreans.
mm,
Um, we know so little about it that anybody arguing anything will find an opposing viewpoint that is also logical. And so the way that I approach questions like that is I accept the paradox
yeah.
and I accept not knowing. So I find it fascinating to look at the Voynich manuscript and to look at the various ways that people have attempted to find meaning in it. And also it's fascinating to look at the historical aspects of it. Is it a real relic or is it a fake that's incredibly well fashioned? And I find all that very interesting. But I don't have my own opinion about whether it's real or not, or what it's actually um, saying. And
Me
that's,
neither.
yeah, exactly, right? Because I mean, you have to accept when you don't know. But there's a spectrum in all of this work that runs from the fairly accessible, even though it may be a little mysterious, to these kind of mysteries, which are just like, the mystery wrapped within the enigma. And they're almost like Zen koans in a sense. You break your intellect trying to figure out how this thing works, and
Yeah,
something bigger than the intellect is able to shine through.
that is a poignant point. I like that. Um, Now, using Manly Hall to branch out a little bit,
Mhm.
I'm curious. Let's see where to start, honestly. It- I firstly, I've always been interested. I've heard him talk about um uh, psychedelics, but just drugs in the alchemical sense here and there. And there's one lecture that I've gone back to a couple times where he talks about, it's been a little while, where he talks about like narcotics and the nervous system and how that gets into metaphysics.
Mhm.
What was his, but he's always kind of vague overall, like he's he seems hesitant to give people overt rules, which is something that I always liked about him. And
Yeah.
and he wasn't hesitant to caution people, which is
Hmm.
another a great point in his favor, I think.
Hmm.
So granted that while you have to keep in mind discipline and the sacramental quality and all these things, the plants and like quote unquote drugs, which seems to describe more the use than the substance. Um, they're integral to alchemy, and then you get into altered states of consciousness and stuff. Like, what was his overall viewpoint on all that?
Hmm. He, we had a very interesting conversation once when we were over at his house, and they had the TV on. They would kind of go channel to channel, and MTV came on, and they left it on for
Wow,
a moment. And at
that's
that
wild.
time, yeah,
Just
at
in and
that
of
time,
itself, that's wild.
it is. And at that time, he wasn't very supportive of music of that style.
Mhm.
He felt that it was exasperating problems that society had. But as we watched for a moment, he commented. He said, he said the tragedy about this world of music that we have now is that with the drugs that the fans and the musicians are taking, and with the light shows that are going on, and the way that the music crescendos and the volume and the use of dynamics, it's a mystery school,
Mm.
but it doesn't teach anything. And so what
Mm.
happens is it opens the psychic centers of the people who follow it, but they don't know that it has. And so they're inundated with psychic influences, and they don't know how to handle it or what's really going on, or they think it's all just recreational.
Mhm.
And it's really a shame because the same kinds of activities were used in the ancient days for awakening awareness of the soul. The
Wow.
lights, the loud music, the use of intoxicants, and the big crowd scenes, and the costumes, the all the glowing, glittering of it.
Yeah, it's so true.
And
That's where it all comes from. Is that
yeah,
that
absolutely. So now, as far as the use of them, I mean, he enjoyed what he called his libation, which was a coffee cup with a dry martini in it in the early afternoon. And he saw very much the damage that was being done by drug culture, especially for people who were pursuing mystical and magical paths. And so he was somebody that gave a lot of caution about it because he felt that what was happening was. We had another conversation once where I asked him, if you had it all to do over again, would you do anything different? He told me that he would have not emphasized the invisible masters, initiates kind of glamour as heavily as he did in his earlier years. And he said that he also would have made it um, almost a rule that people entering the spiritual path should also study some form of psychology first.
yeah.
That to have an awareness of the how the psyche works, and to know about the shadow, and to have some way around these experiences that were going to be happening to you by understanding how your own psyche worked would be very valuable and would help protect people. So what often happens is that people enter a spiritual path because they're reacting to pain or loss, and they are bringing with them issues that occurred to them in their childhoods or earlier in their lives, as they were experiencing the various uh, challenges that we experience as we grow up and mature, and that they had these complexes and problems. Some of them could be karmic, and they brought with them. And now you add to that a spiritual path. And as Madame Blavatsky pointed out, often when you first get on a spiritual path, all the bad stuff comes up.
Mhm.
And so now it's amplified. If you had a sense of self-importance that was based on insecurity, it might be twice as bad now. Now you feel like, you were chosen to be an initiate. If you have the feeling that people are attacking you all the time because you were bullied, then you might feel that oh my God, now I'm sensing all this hostile energy. And he said, now if you add drugs which further amplify it, right, you can see how easily it can spin out of control. And then especially if you've got a practitioner who is solo and who is reading books and interpreting words without any access to experienced practitioners in that path, there's a lot of room for misinterpretation and confusion. And so while you can still go through, all of that and still evolve, because that's your destiny. That's our heritage, is to rediscover what and who we are. But it makes it much more dangerous. And he had to deal with so many people who had, because of this combination of spirituality and drugs, had nervous breakdowns or psychotic breakdowns even. And so he preferred gentle, natural, spiritual evolution. He preferred that we not depend on powerful drugs and on religions that we follow slavishly, or the kind of mentality. For instance, I used to run into people when I worked with him who were ceremonial magicians, and ceremonial magic is complicated, and everything must be done perfectly. And they would finish a session and then realize that they messed something up, and then they would neurotically drive themselves crazy with the fear that an entity had been able to escape the circle. And so those kinds of experiences led him to teach this gentle, natural, kind of wholesome approach to self-development, or self-unfoldment, as he liked to call it.
Well said. Yeah, that was always one of the things that drew me to him. And I'd like to hear your thoughts more. I've At a certain point, I don't remember all the details, but there was a conversation between you and him where he said something to the effect of, um, he didn't want you when he was gone to just simply follow in his footsteps at the Philosophical Research Society. And the way he put it just sounded like the best of intentions. Like the guy just sounds like such a gem. You hear stories about people who are commendable, and then the more you dig into it, you're like, oh, there's the skeletons or something. But you don't really find that. Um, I've I You and Tamra mention at one point um how Manly Hall's wife would kind of point out to you guys when he was sort of like basking in the moment of people enjoying his expertise or something.
Yeah.
And even that seemed pretty wholesome, it didn't let it go to his head. Like he just seemed like a guy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
the
no, it was really cute. I mean, it was very warm because people just loved him. There was this affection for the wisdom that he was sharing and his kindness, and
yeah.
he kind of basked in it. And she would watch him. We would be standing with her off to the side, and she had a thick German accent. She would say, "Look at him, he loves it."
That's so fun.
But because she felt he shouldn't, she was like, no, 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 you should, that's ego, and she was warning Tamra, don't let Ronnie go down his path. He went down the path of being worshipped by his followers. She was like this. I mean, Marie Hall was an amazing mystic, and I mean, she's usually written about as a crazy person, and they say that she was kind of a burden to his life, and we got to really observe them, and she could be very difficult. I mean, she was into her mission. I mean, she felt like she had a revelation that could save the world, and she would get worked up. Now, I found out later that she was suffering from diabetes at the time and didn't know it. So she was going through these sugar spikes and would
Ooh,
get really manic, right?
oh no.
But it was always about her work, and she would just start talking about, oh, the space mother principle and the redemptive power of the divine, and how it was going to change society because the mothers of society were no longer going to stand up for it, and they were going to create a better world. And all this was based on what the Rosicrucians. I mean, it was incredible to listen to her. She could go on for hours, and
Wow.
um, he would kind of close his eyes. You think he was asleep, and then she would say, "Manly, who was it?" And he would say, "Oh, that was Saint Germain who said that," or something. You would have the answer right there for her. And but then sometimes she would get angry at him, and she'd be like, "Why are you teaching people all this dust? All these dusty old books, and you should be teaching them my revelation, a living revelation." And it was ugly when she did that. I was good at talking her down, and eventually he asked me to work with her and to try to learn what she was teaching, and I got pretty far with it. But she was hard to work with. But these two people in their 80s were in love. The way they would look at each other and talk to each other, and just their little there's so much affection there, and so much sweetness. It was really beautiful to be around. And I think that, even though that she could upset him, and her hysterias were disturbing to him, I think he kind of understood. He once told me that he saw her in the tradition of visionaries like Jacob Boehme and William Blake, and some people, people like that can be very volatile because they're misunderstood. And indeed, it was painful for her to be dismissed as Manly Hall's crazy wife. He married her because she's pretty, when she was really a brilliant intellect. It may have been, somewhat deranged by her physical issues, but man, I mean, I did learn a lot from her. And she did these incredible diagrams, these huge diagrams that were like blueprints of how creation happened. And in naming the various elements of these diagrams, she would pilfer through the mythologies of the world, and so she would use, this is the Zeus energy, and then over here is the Father CRC, and these were all metaphors for subtleties that she was trying to get across. So to me, it felt like listening to a Neoplatonist or somebody in Alexandria in the ancient times who was syncretistically putting together all the different religions. And I found it fascinating. And obviously he did too, because he did find value in her work. And he actually lectured about it once during those 7 years. And she was in the audience. It was terrible, dude. She was like, I was on one side of her, and Tamra was on the other. And here he is giving the lecture, and she's like, "Oh, no, 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 that's not right." All through the lecture.
Oh man, oh man, what a scene.
It was kind of awesome, but it was so
Yeah,
awesome to
quite
see
a
a woman
memory.
that was so creative, so dedicated, so devoted to helping the world, and this man who was supporting her and was dealing with her issues, and it was okay because here was this woman doing this incredible stuff. And he had written once that there was no higher calling than when a man is fortunate enough to get around a woman who has a vision. Serving that vision is the highest calling. And I think that he did that to the best of his ability, which was limited because his audience was not very interested in her.
Yeah, well, that it sounds like she, because of certain things, didn't know how to package her energy to new people. But I feel for her, but it sounds like a fascinating character. No wonder Manly P. Hall was so interested in her.
Yeah.
I wanna try those double doors with a dollar sign and a swastika. What is revolution? What is alright? Who says it's revolution?
Hello. Is this thing on? Okay, please edit this out for me. My name is Steve Buscemi, formerly known as Jefferson Tillamook Slinger. As many of you know, I am a big fan of the Highlander movies and television show, but many of you may not know how confusing and fucking stupid that the whole storyline is, and I'm here to tell you, as a public service announcement to all them youngins out there that don't understand the Highlander franchise, it's okay. You're not alone. And if it makes you feel any better, basically the director's cut of the first movie and the TV show are the only things you really need to pay attention to. Everything else is just retconned bullshit. And it's a mockery. So just forget about, the second and third movies and all those sci-fi channel movies. It was all not good. It just served to confuse people, and even the people involved with those projects have pretty much said, don't think of those as an official story, so don't worry, maybe you can rest easy at night. But the fact of the matter is, the Highlander series might be perhaps the biggest botch in all of nerd culture history. Next to things like the movie Jumper with Hayden Christensen. Could have been great, was not very great. Also, Die Hard was a Christmas movie, and I am a classy movie critic. Oh, God.
Dang old man. Listen here, y'all. This is your good old boyfriend, and your good old friend that's a boy, not a boyfriend, Tippy Patson here. And, from all them Black Hoodie Alchemy episodes. And I'm just here to tell y'all about some of the great commentaries that have been going on this program with the good old Anthony Tyler. We've done some great episodes, just like Richard the Abominable Snowman, Kuklinski, the Jewish locksmith known as Israel Keys, the Puerto Rican Batman known as Pedro Rodriguez Filho, and dang old Macaulay Culkin's gay murderous brother, Michael Alec, and a whole lot more, y'all. So why don't you go on, tune in, and check them Black Hoodie Alchemy episodes out. Don't forget I'm Tippy Patson of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And I hope to dang old hear from y'all soon.
Chicken, your TV, president and the movies. 100-foot water slide, your gentle warm, hold it light. Don't be shy, know where to hide. Stand above a parasite, stand above a flame. Stand above a give me a second to explain myself, so you don't really understand what's going on here. We could be like the perfect chess game. We could be like the sun peeking up over a wall. We could be like, remember that folded bed? Remember that forest of antennas that we were feeling in the depth of the night, but there were no frequencies raining down to touch us? Just these antennas waiting for some kind of message to come across, like the sun peeking out from behind a wall, like the sun peeking out from behind a wall. If you just try to understand, you would realize I'm like the sun trying to peek out from behind.
Last thing I kind of want to bring up, because we can get into just American metaphysical religion, and I've also heard you talk about Howard Bloom's book, The American Religion, and this idea of just spirituality without all the labels, just from like that third person view of American spirituality. It gets really interesting. But I first heard this story in your conversation with Ashley Ryan, and I got to bring it up real quick because I've told multiple people this story for you already in my personal life because I was so blown away by it. And I think it speaks to, I don't know what you said about, he was just in the Tao. I've been, I go to a weekly Buddhist meditation group with a friend that hosts it. And he's always talking to me about Buddhism. I'm very inspired by Buddhism and Taoism, and he's been talking with me more about enlightenment. And I'm re refamiliarizing myself with the idea like there's a whole lot of fluff around enlightenment, but at its core, in some of these things I would push back on sometimes because you would see involved with enlightenment, just do away with dualities like right and wrong, just who needs either of them? And it sounds dismissive on the face of it sometimes, but really it is to a transcendence. Like if you're in the Tao, so to speak, then you don't have to weigh the two. It's just understood. And there's an inherent altruism to it and so forth. And Manly Hall really seemed to have found something like that, if not that entirely. But the story of how you heard that he stopped a potential riot from happening, and then you and Tamra decided you wanted to ask him about it. And instead of asking him, you got this encounter at a diner
Yeah,
that
that was amazing. That
yeah,
was
would
really amazing.
yeah.
So what was happening was I was studying the Neo-Pythagorean Apollonius of Tyana, who was considered at one time to be sort of a competitor to Jesus in terms of a very ethical, very highly evolved spiritual teacher, but representing paganism. And there was a story in the book about Apollonius, the most famous book by Philostratus, that he had stopped a riot simply by standing there, and that he had such dignity and tranquility about him that the rioters, sort of one by one, felt his presence and turned and felt ashamed and stopped, and then it slowly spread across the riot until there was no riot. I happened to be studying Homer at the time, and it reminded me very much of the scene where Achilles finds out that Patroclus has been killed, and runs to the battle. He's butt naked, and he stands there on this low ridge, and he just screams this war cry of rage that his friend has been murdered, and this there's naked Achilles screaming over the battle, and Homer tells us that when everybody realizes that Achilles had not been killed because they thought that he had when Patroclus was killed, and they see that it is Achilles in rage, that the battle stopped because everybody turned and wound up, staring in awe at Achilles, who was announcing his intent to murder all the Trojans. And I thought that very likely this story about Apollonius was some classical scholar from antiquity borrowing the Achilles story and making it into something a little bit more elevated for the Christian competition. And so I wanted to ask him about it, and Tamara and I talked about it, and we both agreed, bullshit, man. Like there's no way when there's a riot that you could stand there and stop it. So we decided, since we were going to be having dinner with the Halls that night, that we would talk to him about it and see what he thought of it. This was an off night, a weeknight. On Sundays, he would usually go have lunch at this place called Michael's on Las Feliz Boulevard every Sunday for decades. And everybody knew that he would be there. So the place would fill up with the people who'd come to his lecture, and everybody would kind of slowly go by his table, and they would thank him. And we drove all the way from New Hampshire to see you. It was really wonderful. And they knew him very well at the restaurant. But this was a very busy weeknight, and they could not put him like they normally did ahead of the line. He had to stand in line. And so Marie, who was kind of his main driver, and that's a whole story into itself that Tamara tells, they must have had angels around them, as she said, because that woman was a maniac on the road. And so she was like, I'll go park the car and you stand with Manly. So Tamara and I stood there with him. And in front of us in line was this couple. The woman noticed that Manly Hall was standing there, with his cane, and he looked kind of uncomfortable, and she was trying to be sweet, and she kind of looked at him and kind of smiled a little, and he smiled at her, and um, for whatever reason, the man was infuriated by this interaction, and he grabbed hold of her arm really hard, and she winced, and his face kind of turned red, and he said something to her in her ear, and she looked frightened, and um, Manly Hall he had these big feet that moved slow. He was a big man, and he started to do this, like he sort of inched forward in this very slow way until she realized that he was almost imperceptibly getting in the guy's way and separating them. And so she kind of slipped behind Manly Hall. And this enraged the guy. His face turned bright red. And he looked up, Manly Hall, like I said, tall guy. He looks up at Manly Hall and he starts screaming at him. He's like spitting with rage.
Jeez.
And I'm like, so, I turned sideways ready to fight. I thought for sure it was, I was going to have to throw a punch or something. And Manly Hall totally ignored him. He was looking like into the distance. It always reminded me of like he was looking at a garden and looking at, what was going on in the garden. He looked so peaceful and so content while this guy's screaming at him and threatening him. And after a moment or two, with everybody staring, everybody was horrified by what was going on, and then this peaceful expression on Manly Hall's face, I saw the man's face change. I saw shame take over, and he backed off. He looked really sheepish. He took his wife's hand from around Manly Hall. He apologized to Manly Hall and to everybody else, and then he walked away back into the parking lot with her. And I was
Wild.
still kind of afraid for her, but seeing that he didn't say a word, that he didn't even look at the guy, and the way he had insinuated himself into the situation to protect her, and the way that this had deflected ultimately within a matter of moments all of this rage and made this man see himself. I never even asked him about Apollonius. Like Tamara and I just kind of looked at each other and went, well, yeah, I guess you could. Because if you can do that for one person, then there's two people standing there, you know what I mean? Or not rioting. And it could spread like that.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
And a good example of, again, with his way with synchronicities, that I'm not, in no way did he, he maestroed that situation to happen to answer our question, but look how he was so in there with nature and everything that it just like things would happen like that, where he's teaching, without even knowing that he was teaching in a sense.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Damn. Yeah, talk about the Tao right there. Um, well, so man, your experiences with Manly P. Hall, it's so illustrious in grounded ways. It doesn't sound like you're like hyping it up too much or anything, but it's just so it feels like we had like an internship at like the spiritual Hall of Justice with the Justice League or something. It's
Yeah.
really and all the characters surrounding Manly P. Hall. And that gets us into, what we've teased a little bit, the idea of the American metaphysical religion in your book about it. Um, I kept thinking about this metaphor for like the third person kind of vantage point on the spiritual practices in American history, and y- the viewpoint you're giving, the viewpoint at with Harold Bloom, it's almost like, I don't know if you or any of the listeners, at least someone's come across this, but like quick videos online of different countries, whether it's like Asian people or something, that are pretending to do an American English accent, and it just basically sounds like gibberish, and it's just meant to be fun. Like, people can caricaturize other languages, and it's just dumb and likely offensive if you're not careful. Wouldn't recommend it, but you're it's weird to hear that back at you, and it's definitely a mind teaser. And it kind of tickles your brain a little bit. I got a kick out of it when I heard it. And so looking at American religion just kind of from that that third person perspective, you start to see a lot of stuff going on. I think kind of some tip of the iceberg examples, like the fact that UFO sightings are so centralized in America. They're not exclusive to America by any means, but it seems to be really typified in the American spiritual mindset. And that's really just the beginning. You get into different alchemists in colonial history, and it goes all the way up. And I'd really like to hear your opinion on this kind of standpoint, this third person standpoint.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, broad question, so we'll pick it apart from there. But
Okay.
yeah.
So, well, I'll tell you how the book began was in that vault with Manly Hall. There was a big leather volume down on the bottom shelf that I noticed, and it said The Platonist on it. And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Oh, that's a good one. Pick it up." So I picked it up, opened it, and it was a newspaper that had been published around the time of the gunfight at the OK Corral in St. Louis, when St. Louis was still considered the West, and St. Louis was still a cow town, although it was becoming industrialized. And this newspaper was filled with translations of Plato, of the Neoplatonists, Plotinus, Proclus, Iamblichus. It had translations of the Parisian magus Eliphas Levi that had been done by Abner Doubleday, who was a Civil War general who was supposedly the inventor of baseball. He wasn't really. That was just a stunt, a publicity stunt by Spalding. But he was a super wholesome character in American history, Abner Doubleday, and here he was translating, of all people, Eliphas Levi. And so the mystery of why did this thing happen? Like, why would somebody in a frontier town publish this thing? How did it happen?
Mm-hmm.
And when I asked Manly Hall, he didn't really know much about it. There was so little information available. And he knew one of the writers was Alexander Wilder, who had been a friend of Blavatsky's and the editor of Isis Unveiled, and who'd written several books that I ran into in the library that are kind of wonderful. But the rest of the people that were involved, we didn't really have much information on. And that started me on a journey through libraries and then eventually online, seeking information about these people that uncovered more and more amazing facts about American history. And so I was fortunate because there was a revolution in academia that was occurring. It really started, I would say, in the late 70s, because before that, like, no one looked at anything but big Christian institutions and the religious studies departments in all the American universities. And everything else was considered superstitious nonsense. I mean, even Pentecostals were considered beneath study. But slowly in the 70s, and I think the explosion of the New Age that kind of started there out of the hippie movement and then really blossomed in the 80s helped this move along. It kind of, for me, starts with a book by a guy named John Butler in 1979, where he examined Christianity in early America and gave us a very different portrait of what we're taught. Because we're taught that America was founded by strict Christians and that America has always been strictly Christian. And any metaphysical or occult or esoteric stuff was just very fringe, very unimportant, and didn't really influence anything. Well, Butler started out by sort of taking a sledgehammer to this image of Christian America by pointing out that, in fact, American colonists from the beginning had a very ambivalent relationship with Christian congregations. And in 1650, for example, in New England, only about 1/3 of all adults ever belonged to a church at all.
Wow.
The rate was even lower in the middle and southern colonies. By the eve of the American Revolution, there were only 15% of colonists that belonged to any church. Just 15%.
Yeah, that is surprising. Yeah. No
And in
kidding.
1687, we have the governor of New York writing that he's upset because there's no religious sentiment at all among the colonials, that they have these wildly unorthodox religious opinions. Superstitions they brought with them from the old world, and they're mixing all these superstitions together, and why won't they come sit in church? So that's how it starts. Now, along comes Bloom, and he publishes this famous book where he says America is not a Christian country. In fact, what America is he called it American Gnosticism. And he called the New Age, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. He called it American Orphism. And he called the California New Age movement California Orphism. And he said that America is Gnostic and Orphic. And then he went on to present his argument for the case that even Christianity in America is more Gnostic Christianity, is more pagan and more metaphysical than it is actually Christian. And I make an extended version of this argument in my book where I point out the ways that modern Christianity resembles American metaphysical religion more than it resembles Christianity, because in traditional Christianity, a rich man doesn't have any chance to get to heaven. In traditional Christianity, you're supposed to be nonviolent. And in American Christianity, God wants you to be rich. And if you're not rich, it's because you're not godly enough. And in American Christianity, you're violent. Jesus is shown carrying a gun in some of these portrayals.
Yeah.
So it's a different religion, and it has much has been taken from American metaphysical religion, which is very concerned with how do I get in harmony with nature and the divine so I can succeed, so I can be prosperous, so I can have a good community and a good life. And so Bloom kind of opened the floodgates with this book. And there began to be more and more study. Now, as the internet started to get rolling, for me in the 90s, it was in the early 2000s, it was like a golden era for research because everything was going online. So in those early days, both Google and Amazon allowed you to search any book that they carried from beginning to end.
Wow.
Now, you can't do that anymore.
I remember some of that, actually. Yeah.
Right? And here's the thing. I could not have written this book now because with the new rules, you can't do that. And I just couldn't have done it.
When did that shift happen? What year-ish?
It happened in the late 2010s, middle 2010s, and there it started to kind of first, I think Amazon did it, and then Google did it. And but boy, in those early days, I could look up anything, any academic book. I mean, these books are expensive. The academic books cost $150, some of them, but I had access to everything. And this revolution opened up a whole new field of study called American Metaphysical Religion. And there's a great book called A Republic of Mind and Spirit by a woman named Albanese that kind of really was the book that started it. Yale published it. And she makes an argument there that is very similar to Manly Hall's argument that there's been this spiritual tradition throughout Western esotericism that's been very influential on society, and that this tradition has been in America since the earliest days and has been a strong influence all the way through the Republic and continues to be. So I also was very fortunate because for whatever reason, I don't know why, I kept running into, and I still run into people who tell me well, academia, the academics are such assholes, and they don't help. They don't like people like us who aren't professionals, and they're not going to, help you. They're going to probably hate you. And well, I've had incredible support from academia. They've been just, I've just always reached out and said, hey, can I have a copy of your paper, or can you explain to me what you meant here? And I found, I don't know why me, but they will talk to me. I've become good friends with many of them, and they were so generous, sharing time and resources and information. And this is nothing less than a revolution in the view of American history that is such a violent change in terms of how we view the country. And I'll illustrate what I mean. And I thought it was very important to capture this in this book, because I wanted to share with people this alternate vision of America. Because, we're raised with this bullshit version of America. We're the good guys and we would never do anything to hurt anybody. And we're a real democracy and everybody's equal. And then we encounter pretty soon the shadow of America, right? The imperial America, if you want to call it that. An America where we really don't have equal rights, where the rich get away with a lot, and where there's a lot of manipulation of other countries, and there's a lot of money spent on tools of violence, and education sucks, and all the rest of it. And we go, well, that's America. And the majority of Americans, I believe, today have learned to hate America in a sense because of that America and the politicians who serve that America.
Yeah.
And here in this book, and through, thanks to all these new studies, is revealed another shadow of America, a positive shadow, if you will, that is something that for people like us is I think, thrilling. And so to give you a couple of examples, a guy named Thomas Morton, the pagan pilgrim, who was sent by, a lot of people don't realize that the Pilgrims were part of an English civil war that was brewing. And so there were these people that were called Cavaliers or Royalists. They were, we usually think of them as the Musketeers, right? That's what they looked like. They had long hair. They usually had the Van Dyke beard and mustache. And they loved the Elizabethan times. They loved Shakespeare. They were bawdy and funny. They loved what they called wenching, which was, having lots of women. They loved drinking and poetry and singing, and they were usually soldiers of one kind or another. Very different from the Pilgrims, who weren't drinking, who weren't even allowed to laugh, who weren't allowed to run because running was sinful. They could walk quickly, but that was it. And whose relationships were fraught with feelings of alienation, not just between men and women, but between men and anyone who believed differently than they did. And eventually this would turn into the Civil War, during which the English decapitated a king and Cromwell took over. But in America, the Pilgrims came over and in this quest for religious freedom, trying to establish a new world what was pure enough for them and for how they wanted to live. And so we were told that they were, deeply Christian, and of course anything occult was strictly forbidden. Well, Tom Morton was sent over by the Cavaliers to be a competition, in a sense, for the Pilgrims. He came over and he opened up a trading post called Marymount. And this was a pun, right? Because it was Mount Mary, named after Mary, the Queen of Heaven. But it was also Mary Mount, as in, have fun screwing, Mary Mount. And he put it on this beautiful hill overlooking the Atlantic, and he ran a completely different operation than the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims were afraid of the New World. They thought it was filled with Satan. They were afraid of the indigenous tribes who were satanically possessed. They were afraid of each other to a degree. There's a cruelty between the rich and the poor. In the post that was built by Tom Morton, everyone was welcome. Everyone was treated equally. There were natives, there were pirates, there was smugglers, there were, just everybody was invited, everybody was treated well. And eventually he decided to celebrate May Day, because back home in England, they would celebrate this pagan holiday, May Day, every year. and they downed a huge yellow pine, and he wrote this really bawdy poem to a goddess, no less. And they opened up the place for a celebration. Everybody's invited. Everybody get together. Well, the Pilgrims heard about this, and they were very upset, even though they were invited. They did not show up, and then he started spreading rumors, even like cartoons, showing it as this terrible, they were all drunken fornicators, and they were, doing terrible things. Pirates were screwing, white women, and the natives were involved, and I mean, just really salacious, terrible rumors. And Tom Morton tells us quite the opposite, that he said, in fact, the indigenous women are a lot more moral than the English girls back home. And he said that we were all like in wonder of each other, treating each other with kindness and conversations. Everybody was interested in, what do you believe? What do you dream? He wanted information about, for instance, the different streams and springs that the local tribes knew about, and what kind of medicinal qualities they had. And so everyone was sharing skills and jokes and information, and he thought it was this beautiful, idyllic experience. Eventually, the Pilgrims would close down Marymount. Tom Morton was the first American to be arrested for having a wild party. Tom Morton was the first American to be foreclosed upon by a corporation because the Pilgrims were incorporated.
Wow.
He was the first American to publish a dick joke. He was the first American to publish a fart joke.
Damn. This guy's a legend.
Right? And so he fought them. And by the way, he came to America when he was 50 years old, traveled across the Atlantic, and did all this stuff in his 50s.
Damn.
When they arrested him in winter, they imprisoned him, and the Pilgrims were starving. And he said, let me go hunt for you. I swear to God, I will come back and you can imprison me again, okay? But I'm not going to sit here and watch everybody starve when there's food all around you. What's wrong with you people?
Mm-hmm.
And so they sent him out to hunt, and he brought back food, but he wasn't able to bring back enough for everyone. And so the rich took the food, the richer Pilgrims, and they let the poor starve. And when he said, let me go out and get food for them, they refused.
Wow.
He was horrified by that. Also, the Pilgrims, he pointed out, were taking indentured servants and people they were railroading through court cases and sending them to be slaves, basically, on these brand new inventions, tobacco plantations.
Wow.
And he actually helped people avoid that fate, and he was against slavery while they were establishing one of the points of the slavery triangle.
Yeah.
And so they marooned him finally, and then he went back and he fought in England for his rights, but they, of course, as we know, they won. And so to me, right there, you get this snapshot of two different Americas. We have an America on the Pilgrim side, which is like, I'm right, you're wrong. You do it my way. If you hang out with people who don't agree with me, then you're my enemy. And by the way, you're serving Satan because I'm the only one serving God. We still have plenty of those Americans around who are, all business, but they're serving Jesus. And on the other side, here we have the America of everybody's invited, sure, invite the outlaws and the smugglers. We're all getting together. We're all talking about our dreams, and we're all talking about our spiritual beliefs, and we're going to help each other out as much as we can. Here's a completely different vision of America. We're going to put up a maypole and celebrate goddesses and, crazy stuff to the Pilgrims. Now, a little bit later, not much, we get one of my favorite American characters, John Winthrop the Younger.
Ah, yes.
And this is a guy who his father is the governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony, and is this guy who's a full-on pilgrim. He's afraid of the wilderness. There's a famous story told about him that he got lost and he wound up being outside at night in the wilderness, not far from the settlement, but he was terrified and went running through the woods, and found a minstrel hut that had been built by a native woman, and he took refuge in there. And when the native woman came back to use it, he scared her off, right? And then at dawn, he walked back home in a shambles. Well, his son was quite a different fellow. Back home in merry old England, his son ran into Rosicrucian writings, and he thought this was it. You know, this is great. I want to be involved in this. I want to be a Rosicrucian. So he went looking for Rosicrucians. He traveled to Europe. He traveled all the way to Constantinople, imitating the supposed founder of Rosicrucianism, Father CRC. And he found no one that impressed him. He wrote very candidly about how some of the people that were being foisted as Rosicrucian initiates were clearly less knowledgeable than even he was with his limited reading as a young man. And then his father called him to come to America. So John Winthrop the Younger packed up his stuff and he came to America, and his crates were filled with alchemical laboratory gear. And he had with him most of the books of John Dee, a big chunk of John Dee's manuscripts and books. John Dee, of course, was called Queen Elizabeth's court wizard and was her astrologer. And he had been much slandered since then and died in poverty. But to Winthrop, there was very important ideas in his books. And he even wrote... he marked all of his crates with John Dee's symbol, the Monas Hieroglyphica, an occult symbol. And this is like, I mean, you know, that's like your dad is a Southern Baptist minister and he tells you to come home from college and all your luggage has pentagrams on it. These are occult symbols on the crates of the son of the governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony. And not only does his father have no problem with it, his father has him set up the alchemical lab in his own house. So in the middle of Boston, in the middle of the Pilgrim thing, the whole, you know, supposedly so Christian thing, there was a big alchemical lab going on at the house of the governor.
Wow.
And eventually, Winthrop the Younger decided that it was too, just much like Roger Williams, who founded Rhode Island, he just found Boston to be stultifying, too many rules, too much control. And so he went out and he became the governor of what he started, which was Connecticut Territory. And he made it a place in the same way that Roger Miller made Rhode Island a place where all the people that were rejected from Boston could come and live good lives. Jews, you know, non-Protestant Christians, mystics, Rosicrucians. I mean, anybody that wanted to follow their own conscience could come to his place and do so. He also decided that he would try to live out the Rosicrucian ideals to the best of his ability. And so even though he had never been initiated by an actual Rosicrucian, to me, he's my favorite Rosicrucian because he really did it. Yeah. He was a great success as an alchemist. Not only did he create gold, apparently, there's very many famous stories of him. There was a particular hill that he used to go to whenever he was low on money, and he would come back a week or two later with these beautiful gold rings of the purest gold. And everybody was like, he's making gold out there. Wow. And he funded everything that he did with this gold. And he also was a very successful alchemist in making medicines. He became the most important doctor in the whole territory. And he was so good at it that people would send their sick who had the means all the way from Europe to America to be treated by him. And he organized a group of women who he taught how to recognize certain common illnesses by their symptoms. And then he provided them with color-coded packets of appropriate medicines that they could give to sick people. And so he became like the doctor to most of New England and wouldn't charge people as the Rosicrucians wouldn't charge people. And he also did the Rosicrucian commitment to protecting the innocent, because when the Pequot tribe were being enslaved, really. They had been decimated by diseases brought by the Europeans. And so the Mohegans had decided to take them over. And Uncas, who some people may know from the famous movie about the early days of America, when called The Last of the Mohicans, and where he's a hero. Uncas was not a hero. Uncas was a bully, and under him, the Mohegans became a pretty vicious tribe. Their idea of a good time was to ask the Pequots to gamble for fun, and then just to shake them down and take everything they had, whether they won or lost.
Wow.
And so, seeing what was being done to these poor people, Winthrop the Younger stepped in and protected them at great personal risk to himself. And the Mohegans showed up, and they like devastated the Pequots. They destroyed all their baskets. They tore off all their clothes and ruined them. They threw them into the freezing river, while a commission from Boston watched it and approved of it. But
Damn.
Winthrop the Younger used this to raise opinion against the commission and against the Mohegans, and he did it. And he won. He actually won them their independence from the Mohegans. And then he fought so that they could have their names back, because the white people who had come there had even stolen their names and had given them like anglicized names. And so he essentially intervened in order to preserve the Pequot tribe. He also protected his men, the people who lived with him and worked with him, from having to go fight wars for the king, because all the colonies were supposed to send soldiers whenever the British king asked for them. And Winthrop the Younger was very adept at avoiding that. He would ignore the calls, and then when they became more strident, he would say, "Oh, well, we're working on an iron foundry out here, and I know you guys want the iron, so I need these guys to work in the factory. I'm sorry, but we are working on the war effort because we're making iron for you." So he even protected women who were accused of being witches, and he and his friends would defend them in court and tried to end the whole witch trial mania.
Wow. God bless
And
him.
finally, one last glimpse of just how different the Pilgrims were than we think. Cotton Mather, who is often even now held up as sort of the ultimate example of a pilgrim, of a Puritan, somebody who was very much involved in the witch trials, although he wasn't one of the more militant. He eventually actually tried to stop them, but in the early days, he was a big reason why they were happening. And he happened to be a friend of John Winthrop the Younger. And when John Winthrop the Younger died, Cotton Mather referred to him in the eulogy that he wrote as Hermes Christianus, the Christian Hermes. And Hermes, whether you're talking about the Greek god Hermes or you're talking about the Egyptian thrice great Hermes of the Hermetica, this is a pilgrim who's complimenting his best friend by calling him a pagan name, the Christian Hermes.
Yeah.
So it's a very different view of what the pilgrims looked like. And then as we went down the line, we being Tamra and I, because even though I wrote the book, she and I did the research together, we were just blown away that over and over again, we kept finding examples of people like this, these influential people who were deeply into the occult and deeply into Platonism and into Eastern religions, and often mixing all this up into new religions and hybrids, or just wholeheartedly inventing new religions. Just, we had a revelation and this is what it is. I heard a voice talking, and starting these communities where people were devoted to Rosicrucian practices or to some other form of mystical practices over and over again. Even though the book is 600 pages long, I mean, it easily could have been 2,000. I mean, I had to there's so many things I couldn't put in there that I wanted to. And the publisher finally just said, like 600 pages, like that's enough, and I still get sometimes people say, well, he left out some really important stuff, and and I'm like, I know, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
I tried to stick with the obscure. I mean, I do write about some well-known things, but for the most part, I try to provide the people that are really forgotten and very interesting and influential. And when you put them all together, you wind up with a very different picture of America than what we get taught in school.
yeah, that's for damn sure. So where do you think it's kind of a two-part question in a way. I have it envisioned in my head and we'll see how it comes out. It
Okay.
seems like the beginning of this archetypal uh, American Americanized hodgepodge, just folk religion in a way.
Hmm.
It it had much more authentic roots when we talk about colonial America and these things. There's that DIY mentality that
Yeah.
we know about from punk rock, and there's in a lot of cases, at least, a lot more than some people would think. There was an open-mindedness, and there
Hmm.
was a sense of individuality, like through your own individuality, um, kind of transcending that and finding something greater than just
Hmm.
yourself. And it seems like we still have roots of that today, and there's a lot of good that we can point to, but things have just veered so far off in so many different directions. I think it's a pretty clear follow through to see how that individuality kind of feeds into consumerism and all that kind of stuff. Like, what do you think about the the beginning to the present in this scope of American metaphysical religion? Like, how have we fallen off? What are the highest points, like the key takeaways and some things like that?
Okay. I think that I am hopeful, despite everything that's going on. I don't think that we've ever seen so much study of these matters and also so much discussion of them in public forums. There's no question to me that this is, people always talk about the New Age in a detrimental kind of way, but it was a huge awakening of many millions of people that launched businesses and religions and all kinds of things that have evolved since then and spawned new things. And I think that's continuing. And so I'm one of the people that I look at TikTok witches in a positive way. I think that that's a fantastic thing that people are feeling. Um, I mean, almost every generation before the one that's doing this, there was a feeling of shame for most people about the tarot or astrology, or you have to be careful about who you mention it around, especially with family or with friends. And it was kind of a dirty secret almost in a sense. And um, now it's something that people have pride about, and then they're out there in social media, broadcasting their experiences and their recommendations. And yeah, maybe they're not, doing so from the point of view of 20 years of rigorous study, but they're sharing very real experiences that they're having. And
Yeah.
I think that's very positive, they're all going to continue evolving, and I think that very exciting things could be happening. Now, I do think that there's a lot of problems that we're looking at in terms of um, the tech has. Let's talk about punk rock for a minute. So the world of music used to be a cultural engine that had all sorts of purposes. For one thing, it was a great way to channel the angst, rage, and frustrated sexuality of people, young people in particular. That doesn't have anywhere to go now. And, when I see school shootings, I see me. I see, if I had been able to get a gun when I was in high school, I probably would have done that.
Yeah, I feel where you're coming from. Yeah.
But I found music. My band was a bad band, but it was a lot better than a school shooting,
Yeah, totally.
and no one got
Absolutely.
shot. And so, and then of course music helped me to evolve. And so music used to be a place where you could go and reinvent yourself. Music used to be a place where if you didn't want to work in the straight world, there were so many jobs. You could make t-shirts, you could be a roadie, you could do local shows, you could, I mean, there was this whole culture, an ecology that grew up around the world of music. And there was a lot that was bad about it. There was a terrible amount of exploitation of young people, especially young women, and a lot of exploitation of musicians as well. But you also had this component where there was almost like the spirituality was there too, right? Because, you know, in the early days of punk, you had somebody like Patti Smith was teaching her fan base about Rumi and about Rilke and about other great poets and spiritual thinkers of history. You had David Bowie talking about Tibetan Buddhism when he was being interviewed by the Pool and Cream magazine. You had tarot cards in Led Zeppelin albums, and even in punk rock, you would run into people that were heavily into various aspects of the occult. And it was an alternate world that you could enter, and you could maybe even live your whole life in, right? Well, unfortunately, you know, what Tamra and I experienced when we went back into music after Manly Hall told us to leave, he told us that he could see that, you know, he was going to be dying soon, and then so were many of the leaders of the society, and that there would be a battle over the millions of dollars of assets the society owned. And he was like, you're a couple of kids, you know, I don't want you in the middle of that. You need to go out and live your own lives and find your own way. And so we went into music and eventually became LA's probably best known Riot Girl band, and then evolved beyond that into other things that we did musically. But
Yeah,
in that
Lucid
world
Nation.
of, yeah, Lucid Nation is the name of the band. In that Riot Girl world was a whole nother mystery school that totally changed my life, because even though I had graduated from being at PRS and being around Manly Hall, I was still carrying a lot of the issues that my society had taught me to carry. And so I was a misogynist to a certain degree. I was somebody that was, you know, male centric, and I had just had a certain way of viewing the world that was picked up from my family and those that I'd grown up around. And here in Riot Girl was like this alchemical transformation where you suddenly saw what it was like for these girls who were, through their songs and their writing and their art, sharing the truth about how much abuse they were all going through. I mean, you sit in a room with, you know, 100, 200 women who have all been raped, and, you know, and hear these horror stories coming out of their families and their schools, and you realize, you know, these are your friends, and you realize it's happening to everybody. And they're saying things like, ask your family, like ask everyone you know who's a female if she's been through this, because you'll be shocked. And I did that, and I was shocked,
Yeah.
because almost everybody I asked had been either raped or abused horribly in some way. And so you see that, and it changes you, and you evolve, and we used to say we're not feminists, we're equalists, right? And we wound up working with the Black Panthers, doing shows with them, and they passed our zines out in prisons all over the Western US. And
Hell yeah.
it was just super exciting to see everybody working together from such different backgrounds, all with the goal of creating you know, better community and better experience of life. Well, when we did our first national tour, it was all ending. Like, I couldn't believe it, man. Like, all our gigs were set up online through bands and fans that we were friends with, which was amazing. I mean, just think about that. You know, no business, no record company, we could literally just go out there and sleep on the floors of our fans' houses, and their moms fed us, and, you know, the gig was down the street, and then we go on to the next state, and we had a song called 30 States in 30 Days, right? And so, but everywhere we went, these famous clubs like the Small Intestine in Baltimore, the Jabberjaw in Los Angeles, and on, they were all being shut down. It was like it was a plan. I don't know how to explain it. I don't know how it all happened at once, but it was all the local city councils, the fire marshals, everybody. They were using these laws that existed all along, but no one had ever bothered about. Like you have to have this many parking places, or you can't have more than this many people without this many fire extinguishers. And all these laws were used to shut down these clubs that were, in a sense, the minor leagues of the whole music business. And for a band like us, who really had zero interest in being in the so-called real music business. I mean, we recorded, Danny Goldberg, who managed Nirvana and who worked with Led Zeppelin, he wrote the intro to Tamra's book, and he tried to sign us several times from several different major labels, and we never did it because we loved that DIY indie world.
Hell yeah.
And it was so much like PRS, right? It was,
Yeah.
DIY, like Manly Hall. And so as these clubs closed down, though, it was impossible to continue doing the work. And then we knew it was over, like in the early 2000s, when we went and did a show actually on my birthday one night at KXLU, the sort of ultimate underground station in Los Angeles. And by the time we got home, the gig was already on Napster,
Wow.
being shared for free. And we just went, oh, fuck. Okay.
Yeah.
And so pretty soon we couldn't sell enough T-shirts or CDs or anything because everything was just going digital. And
Yeah.
that whole world has, for the most part, at least from what I'm hearing out there, has been disappeared.
Yeah, especially
And
after COVID, that was like a nail in the coffin to a lot of small places, like venues that operated on like the fringes of a traditional
yeah, even
income.
those what was left, but it used to be
Exactly.
flourishing. I mean, man, back in the day, like in LA, there were several streets like Melrose, Sunset, where if you went there in the evening, it was just wall-to-wall musicians.
Yeah.
I mean, for decades. I mean,
Sounds
Sunset
amazing,
Boulevard,
man.
yeah, it was, but I mean, you're talking the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. You go to Sunset Boulevard any night, and it's going to be nothing but music fans, musicians, bands, people handing out flyers, live music everywhere.
Hell
Starting
yeah.
in the 2000s, it really subsided because pay to play had to take over, and bands couldn't survive with pay to play. And now there's nothing going on, man.
Yeah.
I mean, like, there's no musician. LA is so, we can't even find musicians to play with because musicians can't afford to live in LA. And the tragedy is that a lot of musicians are moving to small towns where there aren't enough other musicians to make a scene, or in some
Yeah.
cases to even make a band. So we're all forced to migrate into social media, into these digital formats. And, YouTube becomes sort of the only all ages club, and
Yeah.
and it used to be incredible because you'd go to, our first gigs, we opened up for some pretty big underground bands like Bikini Kill, and they were so helpful to us and so cool, and then we had fairly big people in the music business like Danny Goldberg who helped us out just because they liked our band and they were kind to us and gave us opportunities. And those kinds of things are so hard to come by now because everything is measured in clicks. Everything is measured in, how many subscribers do you have? And it's very difficult to have that organic scene. Now, I
Yeah.
think that was already happening because Seattle was sort of the last scene, right? And the reason it was because back then it was still so separated from the music business. There was no A&R up there, so labels and bands could flourish and learn together. And then they broke like a storm across the world. But after that, the record companies got the idea, and they were everywhere, just plucking up the first sign of success anywhere they could find it. And so this lack of a counterculture in the outside world is something that concerns me, because I feel that countercultures are where societies are reborn, where people go to find themselves, and it's the way that people are able to not participate in a system that they don't want to, and to build an alternative ecology. And that's just really not happening anymore. This social media gives you so many wonderful opportunities, but it doesn't seem to really give you that.
Yeah.
And so this is something that I think applies also to metaphysics and to the occult in general. The Philosophical Research Society today is trying to be a cultural hub where they have all kinds of events. They have poetry readings. They have gatherings with a death doula to help people who are going through death experiences themselves or with family or friends. They have horror movies being screened, all kinds of
That's
interesting
dope.
activities that will bring people in so they can meet each other and have some sort of cross pollination. And I hope to see more of that, and I believe we will have more of that as we move forward. Um, I think that would be so healthy for younger generations, and I hope to see them innovate in both the areas of music and metaphysics, right? Which so far we're all living. This is one of the things that's so annoying. I mean, we're all living in the shadows of past generations when it comes to music and metaphysics, aren't we? I mean, if you look at
Hmm.
music, most of the music that you hear is either from the 60s or the 70s or the 80s or it's hip hop. And if it's hip hop, it's usually pretty early hip hop. And that's like the music that's in all the commercials and movies. There's like this
Hmm.
nostalgic thing. And we don't hear a lot of young artists, and the young artists that we hear in general are doing what people used to do rather than doing something that's radically different and interesting. So I hope that maybe we can see a pendulum shift in metaphysics and in music toward a sense of let's do something new. And this spirit is what is at the center of American metaphysical religion. It's what Ralph Waldo Emerson said when he said, hey, why do we have to have the revelations of past generations? Why can't we have a revelation and
Yeah.
have a face-to-face relationship with the divine? And
Amen.
I hope that's where it's going. I think that's where it's going. I think we're in a real conflict right now between, in a sense, these two shadows. Because on the one side, you've got this massive Christian dominionist shadow of, we want to take over everything and control the country and take it back to how it used to be, even though it was never like that, historians point out. And there's a lot of hatred that's bound up in this war. And then on the other side, we have people who are supporting this other vision of America as a place that is filled with egalitarian ideals and is a place where all beliefs are welcome and all people are welcome and we're all learning from each other. And there isn't one right way. It's like one of the things I loved about Manly Hall was that he was teaching that all the ways are the right way, that every way at its core is reflecting the human experience. And since we are spiritual beings, then we have spiritual experiences. And in different times and places, those experiences are recorded in different kinds of words, different imagery. And we think that those are, because of it, it's different. And over the years, as I've studied all these different traditions, I have found, I must say, that when you go deep enough, they do all resemble each other. They're all teaching the same thing. It's almost like after a while, when you get enough of this information and practice, you get almost like an X-ray vision, and the words all make sense to you. So, for instance, I love Christianity because there's a lot of great stuff in it that explains metaphysics
Hmm.
in beautiful language. But the way that most Christians, in my opinion, in my very humble opinion, are practicing it is taking it literally when really it's metaphor.
Yeah.
And like what William Blake said, that, the Bible can only be read by poets.
Right. Yeah. You are among like minds here on this show. That's for sure. Um, yeah. Man, poignant, fertile food for thought. A couple things just as additions to everything you're saying that clicked in my head, little light bulbs as you were talking. I brought this up a little bit in a couple other places, but so worth mentioning. There was I'm pretty sure at least in passing, you're familiar with the name Michael Alec, Party Monster.
Hmm.
Yeah. I in just readings, I was just like, man, what a crazy character. I read some interviews of him, and one thing always stuck out in my mind, just among how wild the story was. Is he talked about how, long story short, he couldn't do, crimes aside, like all the whole club kid scene, he couldn't do that today in the internet era because he said, from my vantage point, the before and after this internet situation, we don't have enough time to incubate these countercultures. There
Right.
needs to be some sort of insulation to where they really find their footing. And then, in like that Seattle scene way, then just open the floodgates. And
Yeah.
yeah, we don't have that anymore. And there's going to have to be, I've thought about that more and more. I think you're absolutely hitting the nail on the head with something. We're going to have to counteract that somehow. And I don't know how, but I do think we're headed in a good direction overall in terms of trying to understand everyone else's viewpoints, even though it's uh, not everybody. There's still plenty of division in the country, unfortunately. I also wanted to briefly mention, shout out to Miguel Connor, host of Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio. He's got a book coming out, don't know when, all about how Elvis was basically like steeped in alchemy and magic. He
Oh,
was,
it's great. I've read it actually.
you have?
Yeah,
Oh,
Tamara and I actually were among the editors for that book.
no kidding.
Yeah.
Awesome. I've
Oh, it's so good.
I knew you had to know about this book in some form or another. Wow. Yeah, another little synchronicity, some fun
Really
stuff
fun
there.
book.
Great. Oh,
Yeah,
I
I know
can't
Elvis
wait.
was deep into it.
Yeah, wow. All right. Awesome. It's a fun little note to wrap up on, I think. The
Yeah,
The only thing I really didn't get to ask you, and we'll get you back on at some point sooner rather than later.
sure.
This was a lot of fun. I know you are well versed in astrology, and
Yeah.
Manly Hall knew he had so many different interests. He was so diverse, but he
Yeah.
was really into astrology as well. I've heard people go so far as just calling him an astrologer, and I think you would
Right.
call yourself an astrologer, right?
Well, I mean, it's certainly astrology is something that I've. Well, let me tell you the story about it real
Yeah,
briefly because
go
he's
ahead.
why I got into it. I
Oh
thought it
yeah,
was nonsense.
I definitely want to hear this. Yeah.
Um, Even when I was working for him, I just thought it was ridiculous. And he used to do these yearly sort of horoscopes for all the countries and everything. They were really awesome. He would work on it for months. It was really something to see. But he
Wow.
was working on one of them, and I came in to ask him something, and I kind of had I don't know why I had the guts to do it, but I sort of said to him, "Really? Like, you really believe in this stuff? Like, like the stars are controlling our fate, you know?" He thought that was really funny. Um, he said, "Look, I would love to debate astrology with you, but you don't know anything about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask one of my friends who's a very good astrologer to teach you, and then we can debate about it." And I said, "Well, that's reasonable."
Yeah.
So he introduced me to this woman, Peggy Fatemi, and she read my chart and Tamara's chart and totally blew our minds. I mean, just, okay, how did you know that about us? And then she taught me some basics, and everybody at PRS, it was a beautiful community. His secretary, the librarians, everybody started giving us astrology books, right?
Oh wow.
Here, read this. This is a good one. You need this one. And so I started to study it, and I could tell, wow, this really works. And so it's been a lifelong experiment for me, just so is the I Ching, actually. And with both of them, I found them to be inexplicably accurate.
Mm.
And they're so weird about it is I still feel this way. I mean, even though I've been doing astrology for a long time and I've done a weekly astrology report on Medium, Instagram, and Facebook for a few years, and I always have people who come back and say, "Oh, wow, you nailed it," or "Thank you so much for this." It still surprises me because it's just it seems so ridiculous that it works. But it does, and it's worked so many times in my experience that it's more ridiculous to dismiss it when you have that much experience with it. And so my conclusion that I came to about it, at least for me, I don't think that it's that the stars compel us or that in any way that we are doomed by the fate of where the planets are at any particular moment. I really like this quote from Plotinus, the Roman Neoplatonist, Syrian Roman Neoplatonist, who said, "The stars are like letters that inscribe themselves at every moment in the sky. Everything in the world is full of signs. All events are coordinated. All things depend on each other. Everything breathes together." End quote. And that's how I see it, as I think we can read the stars and have insights into the present and the past and the future because everything is connected. Everything breathes together. And so the stars to me they're like weather or like signposts that reflect our own existence back to us. And so when the stars are going through certain angular relationships, we find in history that human beings tend to have certain kinds of experiences. It's a really fascinating study, and it's been very helpful in my life. And I'm hopeful. I mean, to go back to your earlier question, the astrology is getting to be a lot better. We went through a period here that was pretty brutal, especially 2008 until 2024, which was Pluto in Capricorn. Traditionally, Pluto in Capricorn has been in our history related to problems around pandemics or epidemics, problems around the breakdown of the distribution of food and other necessities, problems with autocracy among elites who tend to be elder males, and with elder males who seize power and who won't let go of it. It's Pluto in Capricorn has often been involved with cold wars, wars which are really going on, but they happen through proxy states or in ways that aren't just outright world war, even though there is this kind of a world war going on. And they tend to be times, Pluto in Capricorn tends to be a time when there is terrible pessimism. People feel the economy is bad. There's no hope. You work and you work and you work and you never get anywhere. Exacerbating that has been Neptune in Pisces, which is the end of a very long cycle of almost 300 years, and it's an ending. It's a feeling of nostalgia for the past, a feeling of oh, it's all going to end. It's all washing away, and we also have Saturn, which is in Pisces right now, and is ending a cycle of some 27 to 28 years, and is in the same way, is looking toward the past, is feeling endings everywhere, is very sensitive to what is no longer with us. And but we just had in January of this year a shift into Pluto in Aquarius. For a couple of months in fall, it'll go back into Capricorn, but after that, we'll have Pluto in Aquarius for 20 years. And in the past, Pluto in Aquarius has been a time when the people have revolted against tyranny. There was a time of the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution.
Wow.
It's a time when autocratic bureaucracies are dismantled and old institutions are replaced with new modern approaches. It's a time when equality and freedom are very important to people, and a time of great inventions and discoveries and cures. So we're about to go through starting 20 years of this Pluto in Aquarius, and we're about to have, in another year or two, Saturn starting a new cycle in Aries and Neptune starting a new cycle in Neptune. And while certainly there's a feeling there, with so much Aries that there could be more war and more division and hostility, it's going to be the feeling of spring. It's going to be the feeling of starting over again. This is a new cycle. The old cycle is ended. New generations will step up. Older generations' power structures will die off. So those things make me feel kind of optimistic. I feel like the younger generations are much more open-minded. They're much more interested in all sorts of avenues of spirituality. They're much less likely to be deeply bigoted like their grandparents. And although we'll still be struggling, I'm sure, with that side of America, I do feel that we're going to be experiencing some kind of a renaissance if we can dodge these big issues around, people using AI to just utterly control us and everything, or the elite using genetic enhancement and AI in order to give themselves, 150-year lifespans and to make their kids, 6'8" with 200 IQs. And,
Yeah.
that's going to be, that's a real challenge because that technology is pretty much here.
Mm-hmm.
And those who have the money to use it are ruthless enough to attempt to create a sort of separate, superior caste of human beings. But so there are challenges that we're facing here as we move forward in the world, not the least of which have to do with overpopulation, in my opinion, and scarcity of resources and impact on weather and all the sorts of things that are still being argued about, surprisingly, in our society.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the kids have less issues around those things. They've grown up in this shit show,
Yeah.
and they've seen how it's playing out. And so I'm hopeful. I think that America's future is brighter. I hope that we can awaken this other side of America that my book documents, and that is going on around us all the time right now, and become less enthralled to the social media, the news feed, the whole system of manipulated ecologies, of online ecologies that are intended really to kind of disempower us while collecting information on us.
Yeah. Big time. Well, yeah, thank you for that. And it's not only some some hopeful food for thought at the end there, but good notes on astrology. How I feel about it and the listeners that I've come across from the show in general, that for whatever reason it just seem to gravitate towards my mindset is I am it was similar to you, like with Manly P. Hall, kind of helping you understand it. Like, well, if this guy can make some sense of it, then there must be some sort of sense to be made here. And I've always, at a certain point, I was like, all right, I see the mechanics. There's some heuristic mechanics. There's
Hmm.
you can look at different schools of astrology and get very similar results.
Hmm.
There's so on and so forth. But I am not like I couldn't break down. I'm not extremely fluent, extremely proficient, and it's been coming around a little more lately for me and a lot of the listeners that have that I keep in contact with. So it's good stuff to mull over there, and I might I'm sure I will end up picking your brain a little bit more about astrology next time around.
Sure.
Yeah. And thanks so much, man. This has been a real pleasure. You're a very calm, you got some calm energy and you're full of you're very captivating. You're a great storyteller. You're a cogent describer. Like yeah, it's good stuff. And I'm sure um yeah, I guess to any listeners out there, don't forget a lot of this stuff we've been talking about, you can find in a whole lot more detail in his books that Tamra is also involved with, at least in the research, if not helping write these things in a lot of cases. American Metaphysical Religion, The Making or the Ordinary Extraordinary, Their Times with Manly Hall, and the Orphic Hymns, The Magic of the Orphic Hymns. So,
Thank you so
Ronnie,
much for thank you so much for having me on here. I really appreciate it. Really enjoyed the conversation. And if any of your listeners want to ask me a question, probably the easiest way to reach me is at the Ronnie Pontiac on Instagram.
awesome. Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, feel free. Like definitely reach out. I encourage it as well. Ronnie's super approachable. Funny enough, as a final little bit, when I talked to Ashley Ryan, I said, "Hey, do would you be willing to like if necessary put in a good word for me to Ronnie? Like he seems like you came across super chill to begin with, but I was like, this guy seems kind of maybe out of my reach. Like maybe I need to present myself accordingly. And I mean, definitely have some respect reaching out to him, but he's super chill. I was like, man, I don't need any of that pleasantries. Ronnie's laid back. But yeah, so check out what Ronnie's got going on, and don't forget to check out Lucid Nation as well. A lot of fun music. They're very talented musicians, and
Thank you.
yeah, for sure. And salute to Manly P Hall,
Yeah.
and yeah, thanks everybody to listen. Thanks everybody for listening. Don't forget, this has been Black Hoodie Alchemy. Smoke weed and God bless.